Welcome to the Casual Birder podcast. I'm Susie Buttress. As a casual birder, I try to find time to watch birds as I go about my daily tasks. Join me each week to hear about the wild birds I've seen, interviews with others, and stories from listeners around the world. Following my last few episodes, where I talked to the birds I'd seen in Mexico and California, this week I'm much closer to home. In my garden, in fact. I live in Hampshire, in southern England. Within a couple of miles there are open farm fields and scattered woodlands. But I live on a suburban estate with a small garden about a quarter of the size of a tennis court. There are 2 mid-sized oak trees at the end of my garden, a small lawn, shrubs and flower beds that are currently untended and a little wild, and a large patio area with mixed paving and decking. So far this year I've counted 24 bird species visiting my garden. And here is one morning of bird watching, featuring my neighbourhood birds. It's a Saturday morning and I'm sitting in my garden to do a 10-minute bird watch. I had intended to go out into our countryside and have a nice little walk in some woods this morning, but when I woke up I found I've got conjunctivitis in one of my eyes, so my left eye is really blurry and I can barely see out of it. So I thought I will go into our garden and just see what comes along. So while I've been sitting here just in the introduction, a little Dunnock turned up. I've got out some suet pellets, sunflower seeds in a large hanging feeder, and some no-mess birdseed in 2 ground feeders. I've also put a few extra suet pellets out in the dish that I've been feeding the hedgehog from, just so there's some easy access pellets for any of the birds that might want to take them. I've got 3 water baths around the garden. One of them is like a traditional pedestal one. That's up the back of the garden and mostly hidden from view by foliage. One of my favourite bathing spots for birds is a large saucer for a planter. It's probably about 18 inches in diameter and it's perfect. It's got nice sloping sides, but deep enough for blue tits, sparrows and blackbirds to bathe in comfortably. So a rook has just turned up and it's landed in the oak tree at the end of the garden. I've had a rook friend that I've mentioned before that's been coming and training me to give food. I don't know if this is it because my eye is hurting too much to look up properly, but we'll see if it approaches. So a rook is a type of crow, a corvid. It's a large bird. It's bigger than, say, a wood pigeon or a white-winged dove, depending on what continent you're in. All over black, but the plumage in sunlight is glossy purple and green, and it has bare grey skin around the beak. Looks like this could be my friend. He's come over quite close. Right, so he's currently gone to the suet feeder on the stand that's about 8 feet from me. Also, a collared dove has turned up in the garden. These were introduced to the UK. They're actually a bird from Asia. This collared dove came down to feed from the seed that I'd put out and stepped on one of the lighter dishes, which tipped up and scared all the birds. So he's given up. He's decided me in the garden's too much. But my rook friend is still here eating the suet. Just to continue describing the rook, very large, solid beak. These are very often seen in groups, and you might see them on roadside verges probing the ground for grubs. But they'll eat quite a range of foods, so these ones will eat seeds and suet pellets. So he's just been disturbed by that magpie that called in the background just then. So he went on alert, but he's now gone back down to feed from the suet feeder. So currently I've also got 2 Dunnocks hopping around in the lawn. I find they keep themselves to themselves in the garden. They seem not to be that bothered by me being out here. They just kind of go off about their business. They interact with each other a lot, and they have one of them's just got up on the fence to do this. They flick their wings a lot, and I think that's a signal to other Dunnocks. From reading about them, they have quite interesting lives and can have multiple partners on the go at one time. So the rook is still eating from a square block of suet inside a metal feeder. A starling has just turned up. He's just walking around the lawn, and a female blackbird has come as well. The starling, when he walks out into the sunlight, has got glossy plumage. You can see greens and purples on his plumage too. And that was the blackbird just leaving. She took a couple of suet pellets and I had to cough, so that sent her off. I think this rook is my friend, so I'm just going to put some suet pellets on the floor for him. So I've put some suet pellets on the ground, about 6 feet from me, and if it wants to, it'll come down and get some, because that'll be easier for it to eat those. They're not in a cage, they're not in a feeder. He can just pick them up and take them away. He's just checking out whether it's safe to go down. He's on the banister of the deck next to me, looking at the suet pellets on the floor. Starling just got freaked for something and flew away, so now he's on a little bit more of alert. The sunlight's on his feathers and he's looking really glossy and purple. It's gorgeous. He's not sure. Jackdaw has just landed in the garden. So Jackdaw is a smaller member of the crow family. Very handsome looking bird with black feathers. This one has got quite prominent silver grey neck and the black cap. Now the jackdaws and the rooks often feed together. This jackdaw is taking advantage of the pellets that got knocked out of the dish by the collared dove previously. The fact that he's eating the suet pellets has meant that the rook is more interested now, because obviously it's competition for the suet pellets that was on the floor. In the background, you can hear collared dove cooing. The other thing jackdaws have is pale blue eyes, which against the black cap and the grey nape, it's quite striking. They've got much smaller beaks than the rooks, much more sort of delicately proportioned. So earlier on I was mentioning about the different types of water baths in the garden. It's got my large plant saucer. I've also got a smaller one, just about 5 inches across. It's small enough that the blue tits feel comfortable to bathe, and there was a blue tit there earlier. Blue tit is one of our smaller birds, quite delicate little bird. Blue cap, blue back and wings, and a yellow breast. Not very strongly coloured. In the breeding season, the males display those colours more strongly, but sort of more of muted blues and yellows. So currently in the background we've got that collared dove calling, and there's a blackbird, and I can hear some jackdaws doing their chack chack noise. Getting closer. There are some young around at the moment, and of course the young birds are demanding to be fed, and they have very insistent voices, which can be fun at 5:30 in the morning. So one of the blackbirds in my neighbourhood has got a distinctive phrase that it keeps singing, and I've been longing to get it on the recording. But I think if it's the one that's calling at the moment, he's just too far away to hear clearly. But he's got a phrase of about 6 notes that he repeats, and for some reason that really stands out from the rest of his song, and I find myself having to repeat it every time I hear him call it. It's such a strange sequence. I've not heard blackbirds do that before, but he seems to have picked it up from somewhere and it's working for him. All is quiet in the garden at the moment. Can't see any movement. There's a wood pigeon up on neighbour's roof. Big stocky pigeon, grey all over, white edges to the wings and a white patch on the back of the neck. They've really increased in numbers over recent years, and it used to be quite unusual to see them in the garden, and now I've been here nearly 20 years and we can get 7 or 8 at one time. Collared dove's turned up again. Whether it's the same one I'm not sure. So in the background, gosh, there's a red kite flying over my head, just doing a lazy circle round. So that's pretty stunning. They're a bird that we just didn't see at all 5 years ago, and then we had one. We knew that they were in, within 50 miles there were quite a lot of them. We started seeing them every now and then, but we see them fairly regularly now. And today it's a beautiful blue sky, and seeing this enormous in terms of it's the biggest bird around here that we see. Bird gliding around with its gorgeous red wings, and it's disappeared for the moment, might come back. And they've got a very flexible tail that really looks like it acts as a rudder, so they'll glide around and the tail will guide them. I just saw a shadow go over the garden, so I think it's behind me now. Absolutely beautiful looking birds. So they're carrion eaters, and some people do feed them, but not round here, I don't think. The gardens are quite small. I don't know that they would come into a garden this small, so I haven't tried. My neighbours are probably quite pleased about that. I've had a few rooks fly over. Wood pigeon is sitting in the oak tree now. We have got swifts in the area, and we might hear those. I've put up 2 swift boxes this year. These birds fly here from Africa, so 9 months of the year they spend their time in Africa, and then spend 3 months here breeding and raising young before flying back to Africa. It's a really amazing journey, and they're the fastest birds in level flight. I've actually got a separate episode all about swifts, where Jamie Wyver from the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds told me all about the initiatives this year to encourage people to put up swift boxes, because they are in decline. We've lost 25% of the population over recent years due to the fact that they nest in older buildings, in cavities in walls, and those sorts of nesting spots are gradually disappearing as buildings are renovated or new houses are put up. So we're encouraged to put swift nest boxes up instead. And I've put 2 up, but nothing has checked them out yet this year. One of the things they suggest doing is playing swift calls at morning and evening, but because I live in a fairly closely populated neighbourhood, I would like to do it, but I don't want to disturb people too much. Okay, some more birds are turning up now. I've got a house sparrow that's just come to the hanging feeder, another starling and juvenile, so we've got 2 adults and 2 juveniles in the garden. The second juvenile is calling with a little sort of churr. Wood pigeon is on our ornamental cherry tree. And that's a great tree. It's got horizontal branches at the top, and then all the leaves hang down from there. So it's a great perching tree, and a lot of the birds that come into the garden go straight to that tree to perch, to check out what's going on before they come in. Starlings have all just flown off. And that was the wood pigeon flying as well. The wood pigeons and the collared doves have quite squeaky wings, and you can definitely hear them fly. If they've been disturbed, they will clap their wings as they fly off, and that does scare all the other birds out of the garden too. So the female sparrow now that's come back to the suet feeder, and that was 2 jackdaws flying over. I think they had a good look in the garden as they flew over, and they saw me and decided not to come in. So for the past few nights I've had a hedgehog in the garden, and I've put out cat food, chicken pieces in jelly for it, just as a supplement. So we've got a little flock of jackdaws that just turned up. And I think there's some young amongst them. So about 4 or 5 birds landed in the oak tree, but I don't know that they'll come in the garden because I'm sitting here. So hedgehogs, you don't tend to see them very often nowadays. I had previously noticed hedgehogs walking through the garden, from the end of our garden, and then walking through our garden and out through our gate to the other side of our house. So when we had our fence replaced, I made sure that we had a space left in the base of the fence. We've got a concrete base to the fence, and I ensured that we had a gap left at the bottom of the fence so that we wouldn't block any traditional routes through the garden. And they do use that route. We had a hedgehog box we put in at the beginning of winter, and we did have a hedgehog hibernating. I don't know if the one that's used in the garden now is the same one, but anyway, he's been coming each night, and he comes out of the bushes and has a little munch on the cat food, and then goes off and wanders around the garden and goes off on his travels. So it's been really nice to see him each night. A few sparrows have turned up now. I've got a male sparrow and a couple of females. These are house sparrows. Now, Greenfinch just flew into the garden to go to the feeder, but they are much more nervous of people. And as soon as it saw me, it sort of turned around in midair and went out again. But hopefully it'll be back. And we've had a bullfinch the last couple of mornings. The male bullfinch, really striking colours, beautiful peachy pink breast and face, black cap and sort of grey back with white wing bars. And in fact, the bullfinch is the artwork for this show. So I mentioned that we've got this pedestal water bath. The starlings particularly like that, and there's a couple drinking on it at the moment. And sometimes what will happen is one of them will decide to start bathing, and they really flap around when they're bathing. And the sound of that attracts more that might be nearby, so suddenly you could have 5 or 6 starlings in a very small bowl all flapping away. Or a juvenile goldfinch has just come to the garden. It's sitting on one of my small acer plants, and I think it's going to go to we have a water feature as well, and I have noticed them going there to get water. It's interesting how different birds will go to different water supplies around the garden. So our water feature has slate in the top of it, and I've got a bowl set in amongst the slate with fresh water in. But then there's less fresh water in the water feature itself, and occasionally we'll put this fountain on. But of all the sources of fresh water in the garden, the juvenile goldfinch will drink the not so fresh water. It's looking at me. It must be a bit of a strange sight. Well, to anyone really. I'm sitting in my garden with my headphones on, holding my mic, talking to myself. I can actually hear some swifts high up. So swifts have got quite a screechy call. It's really warming up now. The sky is blue. I can almost imagine that I'm back in California. There's a little Dunnock peeking out from one of the hedges. As I said, they have ground feeders. A male blackbird just flew into the garden. They're ground feeders, and they all just sort of work their way through the undergrowth, come out onto the lawn occasionally, but then go back into the bushes again. They're quite, self-sufficient birds. They don't seem to need food in the garden. They'll find their own stuff, but they will take tasty morsels that are offered. So if I have got some spare suet out or some smaller bits of food, they'll come and eat that. Right, well, it's 8:30, and I guess I really ought to get on with some of my household chores, much as I'd love to just sit here and watch. Oh, as I said, that jackdaw's just come in the garden, so just wake, so I don't want to disturb it. I think there's definitely youngsters around, so I'll finish now and give them the opportunity to come in and feed if they want to. But I hope you've enjoyed listening to the birds that visited my garden this morning, and I'll try and actually go out for that bird walk over the next few weekends. I mentioned in the recording that I have food put out in the garden for the birds. I feed sunflower hearts year round. I also put out a small amount of no-mess bird seed in ground feeders every morning. In the summer, I top up the suet pellet feeder about twice a week. I usually put out a suet square at the weekend when I'm around the house more to watch the birds. Both of the suet feeders empty out within a day, so that's an infrequent treat. When they're filled, they definitely attract more corvids to the garden. The finches and tits eat the sunflower seeds, although one of the wood pigeons has learned how to position itself and get seeds while flapping its wings. I'm not quite sure what the energy equation is on that one. Any dropped seeds are eaten by the blackbirds and other ground-feeding birds. During the hot and sometimes wet summer, it's important to watch out for any food going mouldy. Ensure feeders and water dishes are cleaned regularly. And it's beneficial to always have fresh water available in the garden. We're currently experiencing hot weather in southern England, but even if it's not, please think about putting out fresh water in shallow dishes for the birds and other creatures that visit your garden. Make sure you have large stones or something similar in the water to enable anything that falls in to escape. I top up my water dishes every evening. In some areas of the United States, it's important not to put out food at all, especially if you have bears roaming your neighbourhood. Seek advice from your local Audubon Society if you do want to feed the birds. There are links in the show notes from the Cornell Lab for Ornithology and the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds for further information on summer feeding.
Guys, we've got to do a promo for this Casual Birder podcast. I haven't written a script, we'll just wing it.
I don't get it. Hi, this is Dan, Ashley and Lewis from Full Starts Podcast.
God, listen to the energy of him.
I'm trying not to disturb the birds.
Oh, so of course, yes.
Ruin the moment.
No, we're definitely bird watching.
This is Dan, Ashley and Lewis from Full Starts Podcast.
And we talk about those films that could have had a sequel, but inevitably failed.
We're out here in London, spelunking for the hibernating birds. If you listen close, you should be able to hear a couple of them in the background. It's a Canadian goose there. There's a penguin. There's a warbler. These are all real birds that you'll definitely find underground in London.
That's why the underground was built.
It's a bird sanctuary down there. Those were all the birds that are around us. If you kindly listen to our podcast, that'd be lovely. We are Full Starts Podcast. You'll find us wherever you find podcasts.
Like this show, Full Starts Podcast is part of the Britpod Scene collective. You can find lots of wonderful podcasts if you search the hashtag BritpodScene on Twitter or visit britpodscene.com. During the week, my main bird watching happens when I'm getting ready for work in the mornings. I look out of my bedroom window as soon as I get up to see what's going on with the birds in my garden, and then I keep checking as I go through my morning routine. Often I'll hear the birds first, and if it's a lesser seen bird, such as a bullfinch or a buzzard calling overhead, I'll rush to see it before it disappears. Other times I can tell from the sound of blackbirds scolding that the magpies are in the garden getting up to mischief, or maybe I'll hear the rook sitting up on a neighbour's roof chattering to itself. A few days ago I glanced out of the kitchen window as I put together my lunch for work, and I saw a sparrowhawk on the ground at the end of the garden. I haven't seen a sparrowhawk yet this year, so that was a pleasant surprise, and a new species to add to my garden list for 2019. It had caught something, and once I grabbed my camera I could see that, true to its name, it had taken a house sparrow. I managed to get a few photographs of the sparrowhawk, and then realised that I had left the camera on nighttime settings after having photographed the hedgehogs from the night before. Oh yes, after mentioning the one hedgehog in my garden birdwatch, we've now had up to 7 visitors a night. I've never seen so many hedgehogs before. Of course, by the time I realised I had it on the wrong settings and changed it, I only managed a few photos before the sparrowhawk flew away. I hadn't noticed the lack of sound in the garden, which happens because a sparrowhawk in the garden causes everything to scatter, and if I hadn't glanced outside, I would have missed seeing this beautiful hawk. And now a little bit of news. This was always intended to be a weekly show, and for most of the episodes it has been so. However, following my vacations and illness earlier this year, my release schedule has been a little erratic. I've therefore decided to move to a twice-monthly release schedule. This will also allow me to work on additional aspects like transcriptions of the episodes and the release of my website. I will sometimes put out bonus mini-episodes in the off-weeks, and with over 60 episodes in the back catalogue, there's plenty of episodes to listen to while waiting for the next one. I've been very happy to welcome more people to the Facebook group and really love hearing about the birds everyone sees. This week, Gustavo posted some lovely photos of 2 kingfishers he'd seen on a morning walk along the local river in Dublin. I particularly enjoyed seeing the jewel-like colours, as it was a dreary grey rainy day where I was. And past guest Ewan, the Edinburgh birdwatcher, posted some photos from his nesting box that has a webcam, showing that a great tit was roosting overnight in it. It's really interesting to see that nest boxes may be used all through the year. Jessica, who lives in Australia, told us about a visit to a family friend who now lives in a nursing home. Jessica said, "As I walked past the glass doors that led to a grassed courtyard-type garden, I saw the most enormous sulphur-crested cockatoo staring at me from a chair back. There were 3 more cockatoos in that little open garden. Apparently the residents feed the birds there. I wish I'd had my phone so I could have taken a picture." On my walk home, I passed by the local creek and spotted 4 little pied cormorants and a bird I think was a cattle egret, didn't have binoculars with me to get a better look, all perched on some semi-submerged trees, looking grumpy about the rain. I also startled a dusky moorhen walking past the rain-swelled swamp in the little nature reserve. Thanks for that, Jessica. It shows that even when maybe you don't expect to do any birding, it's possible to see a variety of species if you allow yourself to notice them. I'm very envious about the sulphur-crested cockatoo. I only saw a few briefly in the distance when I visited Brisbane. I would have loved to have had an opportunity to watch their behaviours. Jenny, who lives in central Queensland, sent us her bird list for the week. She'd seen 14 species, including a posselbird, grey-crowned babbler, Teresian crow, crested bronzewing, laughing kookaburra, grey fantail, pied currawong, and a bird of prey that was possibly a whistling kite. Jenny said that the previous week her son, who currently lives in far north Queensland, saw a pair of cassowaries on the beach. She added that he often sees these very prehistoric-looking birds, but has never seen a pair on the beach before. And Kieran, who I think also lives in southern England, has been doing some great bird watching recently in Hampshire and posted photos including avocets, a beautiful black and white wading bird with a distinctive upturned beak, a linnet and a reed warbler. Why not come and join us in the group? You can find it at facebook.com/groups/Casual Birder Podcast. And there is a Casual Birder Podcast page, so do check that out, but the group is where we have all the conversations. Each Wednesday, I post a bird ID quiz on my social media channels. Do look out for that and have a go at identifying the birds. If you've enjoyed this episode, please tell your friends. Retweeting my episode on Twitter or sharing any of my social media posts is a wonderful way to let others know about the show. And if you do talk about the show online, tag me in your post. It's great to see news about the show getting around, and it helps it grow. Follow me on Twitter at CasualBirderPod or on Instagram at CasualBirderPodcast. And you can email me at casualbirderpod@gmail.com. Make sure you don't miss any episodes by subscribing to the show. Subscribing is free and you can do it wherever you listen. Thank you to Randy Braun for designing the artwork for the show. The theme music is Short Sleeve Shirt by the Drones. Thanks to them for letting me use it. Check out their website at www.dronesmusic.net. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you'll join me again for another episode of the Casual Birder Podcast.